Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you. TPM has used Snapstream as a reporting tool for 15 years, tracking stories as they develop and covering events live. Snapstream now integrates with Blue Sky and has national channels as well as local stations in New York, Atlanta, and Houston. Snapstream can also capture streaming-only content, from congressional committees to live sports. Visit snapstream.com/TPM for a free trial. And thank you, Snapstream, for helping us make our live event happen.
This is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are here for the first time with a live in-person audience, which is very exciting. Yes, it's real. We are not making this up. Before we say anything else, we want to thank Snapstream for the support for this event. And with that out of the way, okay. Kate Riga, you have been, we were just talking before we got started about the Hegseth hearing, and a lot of people will have seen like the headlines and everything, but just to start with, you were saying about the atmosphere in that room.
Yeah, it was really weird. So I was sitting in the press section at the front, and behind me is a wall of mostly dudes in matching Pete for Vets t-shirts. So this just like big, loud group that would like laugh uproariously every time he made a joke, or kind of cheer every time he got a good quip in. So it was already really kind of revved up emotionally. And there were, kind of crescendos. For instance, like when Elizabeth Warren came in, there was this like buzzing. People were like, oh, there's Liz, and they were really, really excited for Pete to kind of show her up. Exactly.
Right.
And at the beginning, there was a series of kind of coordinated protests from veterans who were mostly there about Israel-Gaza, and they were, it was like violent, it was tense, they got kind of bodily dragged out, and those guys would try to start like USA chants and everything. So, it had a sense that I haven't really felt since the Kavanaugh hearings of this like aggressive kind of AstroTurf support for this guy who has been treated abhorrently, right? He's been dragged through the mud. Like, it's embarrassing that he should have to be here. So that was kind of the setting. And then you have the senators by this point who are playing a very different role than they did, we were talking about this a few weeks ago. He was dead in the water, right? Everyone thought that Gates was done, Hegseth was next. It was gonna be this kind of implosion of the nominees, and now we're in a completely different place after this kind of right-wing pressure campaign to force all of the straying Republicans, particularly Joni Ernst, back into line, and everybody came like with those roles assigned, right? I mean, Ernst did some kind of, there'll be a sexual assault czar in the military, and with that, I'm good, right? Like, you have my vote. So, yeah, it was just, it was an atmosphere that really drove home for me, like, we're in Trump 2 for real now, we're back.
Now, isn't that one of the things that was interesting to me is that, people didn't come up with out of their hat that he was in trouble. As we know that, Gates, I don't think we ever found out exactly how his end came about, but he was out. It seemed like Hegseth was out, and you definitely had a test of wills there between a lot of Senate Republicans and Donald Trump, where they were doing this kind of thing. Like, they knew that it was not okay to come out and say, no, I'm not supporting this guy. But you had a lot of, I almost think about it as a bunch of them kind of standing up there with their arms crossed and kind of saying, we're just gonna keep standing here with our arms crossed until you get that this isn't happening, and eventually you'll get it. And there was that standoff, and then there wasn't that standoff. I mean, from your reporting, from following this, I mean, what happened there? Because they didn't roll over immediately. I mean, she was all but saying she wasn't supporting him, and it's clear that the Trump people knew that if she didn't, that would allow 3 or 4 other people who felt like they could stand behind her and her personal story and so forth.
Right. I mean, there was a really concerted pressure campaign, which we know more details of from a New Yorker piece that came out earlier this week. But, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent to pull her back into line. And when she was cowed, I mean, who else is going to have the kind of moral leg to stand on that she did on this issue? So when she, was pulled back into line, everyone else kind of fell along. And then you had this revving up of the people who were always going to vote for him that was really on display yesterday. The sense of the how many push-ups can you do? This strongman machismo thing of, I'm so sorry you have to be here today, as if it's a real trial for someone who wants to lead the Pentagon to have to answer some, cursory questions. And so it made for just a real spectacle where you felt like this is all performance, nothing here is real. And then in terms of the performance itself, I thought Democrats were pretty bad, honestly. I mean, it was the usual kind of lack of coordination where you had 3 or 4 people ask the same exact questions about women in combat, and then you didn't get to the kind of will you use the military against civilians until 4 hours into the hearing. And then meanwhile, you had Republicans, what's one thing you love about your wife, right? This really slavering kind of performance.
Right.
So you walk out of the room feeling he not only is he probably going to get confirmed, but you get the sense that the right feels like that was a triumph, right? That he talked over senators, right? He held his own, he made a quip, he made Elizabeth Warren look dumb, I really think it was a big victory for them.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the, performative nature of Trumpism. I mean, I didn't realize until we got actually into the coverage of this hearing that, except for Jack Reed, he had basically just refused to meet with any of the Democrats,
right.
which is even it's been a long time since you had any nomination, whether it was under Trump's first presidency or George W. Bush, where everybody's like, yeah, I'll kind of see what I think. Right. Mm-hmm. It's not like that. But I don't like to admit when I'm stunned by something, but I was kind of stunned by that. I wasn't sure, at first I wasn't sure, did they refuse to meet with him? But, that's just such a public kind of disrespect.
Yeah.
That was sort of stunning. Did that come up from?
Yeah, well, again, it for me, kind of echoed the Kavanaugh thing in the sense that they could have had almost anyone in this position and they would have glided through, right? Marco Rubio-esque. And Democrats are grateful to vote for Marco Rubio because he's so relatively normal. But instead, they're no, we're gonna stick by the alleged rapist. And by the way, I can't believe you're forcing him to answer questions about that. Or why would you bring up the fact that he was drunk on Fox News' set every day? It's uncouth almost, And I think the not meeting with the Democrats thing is just kind of moving the ball a little bit further down the field where it's I don't need your votes. I'm not going to get your votes. So I'm not even going to pretend, right? I'm not even going to do you the dignity of answering your questions in private. It's he went to see Ernst 3 times, but as soon as he had her locked up, it's why bother, right? They're his enemies. He's there to kind of spar with and try to get good moments to play later on Fox, which, by the way, the Fox coverage was jubilant.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, they've got one of their part of their talent up there running the Pentagon. Yeah, there's the way, this is one of the things we were just talking about before we started, is he is not going to stop having issues with his alcohol consumption or how he, I don't even know what to, defamation law is evolving moment by moment, so I need to be careful here. Challenges in the way he deals with women, that's not gonna stop when he's nominated. He'll be, so there might be more stories that come next.
Well, no, because he promised that if he's in charge of the Pentagon, he'll never drink again. So I actually think we're fine on that count, as if that's not the most alcoholic thing to say in the entire world.
Well, I remember saying that, that because he said that a number of times, as you said, that if you give me the Pentagon,
won't drink a drop.
Won't drink anymore. that's got to, you might, kind of your story introducing yourself at Alcoholics Anonymous. Like that's one for the ages. You're never going to believe how I got here. But that's why. We were talking about this too. That you have. We'll talk about Kash Patel, and there was the hearing today for Bondi, who's I think almost certain. She's kind of in the uncanny valley between sort of the Hegseths and Kash Patels,
right,
and then the Rubios, right? She's kind of almost normal,
yep,
but not quite normal,
mm-hmm,
right? But in any case, what is going to? Did that come up? Did you get in any of your reporting for what Democrats think about this or going in? What he's going to do when he's actually running the Pentagon? Whether I think there's going to continue to be stories. He's not going to change who he is.
Yeah, it'll be a pretty low stress job for him, so that'll probably bode well. Yeah, no, I think literally there's the hope that there will be kind of normal people around him kind of thing. But it's such a sign of the times that we got all these kind of Democratic questions about the women in combat stuff, a smattering of the rape allegation, but I think it in kind of a sad sign, not that much. I do think that Democrats took the lesson from this election of sexual assault is not at all disqualifying, so kind of why spend time on it? You had Tim Kaine, who I thought was the best, who just did a little section on by the way, he's also a shithead. He cheated on all his wives, that also happened. But then you had, towards the end, people who tried to do the more, the mismanagement stuff of he drove these veteran organizations into the ground, and he's never been in charge of more than 20 people or whatever.
He's run TPM-sized organizations.
right. And left them with their finances in such a shambles that they needed a forensic auditor to find out what went wrong. So there was a little bit of that at the end, but it's juiceless at this point, because I think there is a sense of people want an outsider, no matter if the outsiderness is completely performative. And so this kind of trying to get into the weeds about how is he going to control a department with XYZ $1 billion budget and all this people. It almost feels
almost $1 trillion budget.
Right.
It's $850 billion.
It was just kind of yeah, okay, skip, next, boring. It's just, yeah.
Well, this is the thing between him and Bondi. Each of these people are weird or stupid or dangerous in very different ways. And the one reason, I wouldn't say I take solace from it, but the Pentagon is the ultimate big bureaucracy. And the people who are in high-ranking positions at the Pentagon, whether they're in the military or on the civilian side, these are a lot of people who are very sharp bureaucratic players. And I've just seen, it's not I'm thinking there's going to be, I don't know, he's going to have some deputies or special friends or something that are going to keep him in line. But I just haven't seen anything about him that gives me the sense that he has the capacity to, kind of not a great phrase, manhandle a bureaucracy like that and kind of make it, function in the way he wants. I just get the sense they're going to be kind of running circles around him. And I think he will be destructive in his own way, but in some ways I worry less about him than I do about Kash Patel or, with Bondi, because I don't know, like I feel like he's going to be, doing push-ups, right? And or I don't know, the sort of stuff you do when you go on like Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Going on Joe Rogan every day and like doing push-ups there. I don't know, but so that's that. I wouldn't say I take a lot of solace from it. I mean, I don't think it'll be a great place for working in the office of the secretaries. Probably won't be a semi-hostile work environment. I mean, but in terms of like, will we be, I don't know, dropping nuclear warheads on any countries by accident or something like there, I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm less worried.
Right. I mean, that's the ultimate question of this Trump administration, right? Is like on the chaotic to malevolent scale, where will it fall? I think the great shining hope is that they'll be so incompetent that they're not able to execute on the worst of it. And yeah, I mean, he's over his head in every single kind of way, but that's a different version of a threat than, Kash Patel, right? Someone who's coming in with his enemies list, who like has a professional kind of background, who isn't like a weekend anchor on Fox, like has some kind of connection to the job. And it's not like the chaos presidency is like great, but it does seem to pose a different kind of threat than what I think people were really worried about going in and still are. This idea that, Trump will be checked out this time, like he's older, he's more tired, he'll be golfing and kind of like bathing in the adoration of the presidency, but he'll have the Stephen Millers and what have you around him who will do the damage on his behalf kind of thing. And so far, I think it's been something of a mixed bag on that front, because Trump doesn't have the discipline to like pick the most dangerous guys if they are like not handsome, don't kiss his ass enough, you know?
Right.
I mean, it's the Matt Gaetz story, right? Like he picked Gaetz after Gaetz flew with him on the plane and, yes-sir'd him enough into the job. Whereas you can think of like so many people off the top of your head who would have been like really scary in that role. But then he picked Gaetz, who, at this point, I think collapsed. If he hadn't kind of collapsed under his own steam, I think the only way he wouldn't have gotten the job is purely because Republicans hate him and nothing because of like the accusations. I think he really was just such an asshole that even Republicans were like, gotta draw the line.
There were a lot of Republicans who were fine with the statutory rape accusations, but they just didn't like him. He's just an asshole, and that was much more determinative for them. I mean, one thing before we go off Hegseth, I think there was a piece in like maybe in the Atlantic, I can't remember. So someone made the point that in a weird way, he or his Trump handlers ended up using the sexual assault allegations and the alcoholism almost as their strategy, because that is the kind. There's a whole that fits into the whole, grievance thing, and kind of and you're, I don't know, you're in the tradition of Matt Gaetz and Brett Kavanaugh, of other people who've had these challenging issues with women. They're used to that, right? And by focusing on that, it didn't seem to me like there was hardly any emphasis on kind of like, you've never actually had a job. Like you've run some like kind of organizations used to, I mean, I shouldn't criticize, but I think of myself as never having had a real job. But you've never had a job, you've never kind of worked in the military bureaucracy, and how are you even doing this? Like, let's say you didn't rape anybody, or that you didn't drink in the morning. Still, why are you even here? What are we talking about? And that didn't really come up. So they used it as this kind of weird heat shield.
Yep.
In kind of a I don't know, ingenious way.
Yeah, I mean, and then it kind of created all these little traps while you're getting to the main like content, right? This idea of, well, these are anonymous allegations, right? A left-wing media smear campaign. And the anonymous thing, by the way, was so just such like a dirty trick, because I mean, how many times have we seen these really high-profile hearings where the women are dragged forward under their own name, and it's like, oh yeah, did having Anita Hill or Christine Blasey Ford, did that add legitimacy to, right? It's just, that's what you say until the woman is unmasked, and then it's, you know, does she have any disgruntled ex-boyfriends? Does she have any issues in her life you can use to kind of tear her apart? But no, exactly. I mean, and I think Democrats felt that they were trying to go for like the clip that would circulate, right? Mm-hmm. And the clip that will circulate is going to be fighting with him about that women shouldn't be in combat, right? Or the rape allegation. And the mismanagement stuff, it's just, again, you know, it doesn't have juice. And so you get through this whole thing where you spend a lot of time on his like very obvious character deficits, but the nuts and bolts of the job are just clearly, completely elude him. And there was maybe a cumulative like 5 minutes spent on that.
Do you think, and I'm just curious, you know, for the vibe in the room, or how you have seen, you know, how the press has sort of taken in those hearings. And you said before that you found, you know, how the Democrats handled it disappointing. I mean, the thing that occurs to me though is like, what is the standard in that case? Because what seems very important to me is, in terms of how each side goes into this, you certainly don't want to. It seems easy in the press treatment for Democrats to fall into this thing about where you say he's going to get, you know, approved, so I guess you blew it. Or what? Like that's not, like, you can't let that be the standard, because obviously the fix is in. They have a 53-seat majority, so this is totally a decision within the Republican Party. But so what you're trying to do, you're basically you're saying to the Democrats, saying to the Republicans, look, you're gonna do this. You have the power to do it. We have no power to stop you, but we are going to raise the stakes. We are going to highlight what you're doing, and, you know, and almost to the point of saying, hey, go ahead. It's, you know, if you want to do this incredibly stupid thing, raise the stakes for the 2026 election. Was that standard one that anyone was applying here, or was it this kind of like, oh, you didn't break Joni Ernst free, so your questions didn't meet some standard? Yeah,
no, I think it's a really good point, because that is how it gets covered, right? It's like Republicans are a foregone conclusion that they're going to kind of vote for a Republican nominee, no matter how flawed, and the onus is then on kind of Democrats to sink him, which is, as you say, like a numerical impossibility in this case, basically, based on the composition of the Republican Senate caucus at this point. But I think, you know, the countervailing problem there is, you know, Republicans suck up to a Republican nominee, news at 11, right? It's just not very interesting. But I think the way that it's played out so far is like, there's only been enough kind of oxygen to go after like one embattled nominee at a time. And we can see that, by the way. I mean, when's the last time we've talked about RFK or Gabbard, right? I mean, they've become like C and D stories here. And so, you know, it was Gates until the collapse. And then that is when the pressure really moved on to Hegseth. And it was like, he's next. Seems like he's going to survive. And then, you know, it does make me wonder if who is so unqualified for this job by every imaginable metric gets through, is it just that the bar has been moved after Gates? Like, Gates was kind of the sacrificial lamb. Trump didn't get everything he wanted. And then will that kind of like ease the way for the others? And my only thought there is, I still have some question marks about Gabbard because, well, woman, but also her weirdness like doesn't really neatly map onto MAGA stuff the way that Hegseth does, you know?
Right.
Like, you know, being kind of an al-Assad fangirl is not something that MAGA is as comfortable excusing as like sexual assault. So I think that's gonna like prove to be a little bit weirder. And then with RFK, the thing is just, the ways that he's broken from Republican orthodoxy. I think they're going to have to decide if that's something they care about or not. Which, I mean, look at Trump, right? Like, he was kind of a nominal Democrat,
Right.
a pro-choice guy. So they clearly are pretty comfortable like moving on. But you got the anti-abortion segment has questions for him. You have some of the anti-big pharma stuff that the left likes.
You also have these Republicans from farm states who kind of like the stuff about seed oils and high fructose corn syrup that everybody else is like, yeah, whatever. That's a big deal to them.
Right.
Like, there was that thing with Chuck Grassley who's like, you can inject yourself with whatever horse medicine you want, but the seed oil over my dead body, kind of stuff. The thing with this is actually the one thing that surprised me that he nominated Gabbard at all, because most of these people, I mean, Matt Gaetz has made clear that he is Trump's guy. He will always be Trump's guy. I keep having to. Defamation law is changing, Josh. David keeps, where's David Kurtz? He keeps telling me this. Defamation law is evolving very quickly. You've got to be careful. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Tulsi Gabbard. What surprises me about that is she's very new to the club. Like, he gets behind people that are totally do or die, right? That person's going to be with me in every case. And to put her in that position, I mean, there's all the real reasons you wouldn't want her in that position, but I'm surprised he wants her in that position, because again, very new to the club, real weird, and weird, as you said, not weird in MAGA ways, like some ways that kind of overlap, but not those ways. That continues to surprise me, and I do wonder whether, I mean, we were talking about before with, it's certainly not that he ever gave a crap about Pete Hegseth. He was already on the phone with DeSantis while Hegseth was kind of dying on the vine.
On the Hill with J.D. Vance.
Yeah, exactly. So he was, there was that whole storyline where when he just went totally aggressive and went, that Trump liked that, so then he was behind it. And then once he kind of steadied himself, that it became, Trump's thing. It was Trump's honor on the line. I do wonder whether Gabbard's going to be like that. I mean, you made the point before. Those hearings haven't been scheduled yet. And if I were those two, I would say, can you please schedule me? Right? Because that doesn't sound like a total vote of confidence.
I mean, and that's one that I thought odds were just low in terms of if there are any Senate Republicans anymore who care about, national security stuff. And that breed is not completely extinct yet. But with the way they did the Hegseth thing, I mean, also the really caring about the troops thing, you thought that wasn't totally extinct, but I guess it's fine. And so having a Russian mole in charge of the intelligence agencies seems pretty bad.
That's why I think that the Republican senators who are kind of hardcore national security hawks, I think they think, I love the push-up stuff. I love that he is, not going to be so wimpy about women in the military, all this kind of, performative kind of stuff. But there's other people who run the Pentagon. He's not going to, what is he going to do, right? I mean, it's not that big a deal. And I don't know, I just don't have the sense that those kind of people would quite see her in the same light. A, because she's literally not one of them. I mean, she was a Democrat until very recently. I mean, not a great one, but as these things go. And she's, I don't know, I really wonder if that's gonna work.
Well, and Hegseth was also, that was a cultural battle, right? He's the avatar for the Trump movement. It's he's a young white guy, so he absolutely should get everything he wants, right? I mean, she just doesn't fit into that mold for the superficial reasons as well. I mean, See, I was done with her when she started a podcast and she didn't call it Tulsi Gabbs. Like, are you kidding me? Talk about low-hanging fruit.
Right. Well, there you go.
Okay, so let's move on from confirmations to, we saw the death of the rule of law this week, to put it in Shakespearean terms.
Yes.
So we got the one volume of the Smith report, the one on January 6th. The classified docs one is still being held back while that case is on its last legs. And Trump was sentenced. He will be our first felon inaugurated as president. So go America, really good, good first. So with the Smith report, I think we'd seen most of it before, right? Like if you read the indictments, it was a lot of that. I think people got hung up on the we have enough to convict him thing, which is also kind of why you indict people in the first place.
Literally, it's not just like a judgment call. You're actually not supposed to bring an indictment if you don't think if you don't think he's guilty, you shouldn't bring an indictment. That's kind of elementary. But you're actually not supposed to bring one that you don't think you have enough evidence that you're confident of a conviction. So that sounded bad, but is just totally normal.
Right, kind of pro forma.
It would have been weird otherwise.
The part of it that I thought was interesting is what insight we got to the litigation strategy, right? And there was some very polite D.C. kind of prosecutor scorn towards the Supreme Court there, right? He talked about how the immunity thing came out of nowhere and connected that to his concern about charging him with incitement to insurrection because there the case law is so thin, and there are real arguments about can you apply this in this way? It really hasn't been done before, particularly in the context of trying to continue your power rather than like wrest it from somebody else. But then he writes about, and so we're kind of like in debates about that. And then you see immunity where there's lots written about it, and they came down on Trump's side then. So, they kind of abandoned the more tenuous effort there.
It's funny. I was actually I had coffee this afternoon with someone who one of the first TPM interns like 20 years ago. Someone who is a lawyer and works in government. And I was talking with this person about kind of what are you doing next after there's change of presidency coming up. I don't know if people have noticed this. And it connects up here because we've talked about this on the podcast that, if you are a lawyer, and certainly if you're a lawyer in constitutional law or advocacy and stuff like that, you kind of need to believe that the law is a thing, right? that when you make arguments before a judge, that there's actually something happening there. And when I think about people who've been staff lawyers for the ACLU over the last several decades, obviously a lot of times you're losing. It is a very, certainly on civil liberties issues over since 70s and 80s, that's a tough position to be in. But generally speaking, it's because you're going before judges who have a fairly clearly articulated conservative jurisprudence. And it is, in most cases, based on something, right? And at least you know that is there. You know a kind of a framework that they come from. And in that case, you can at least, try to come up with something clever within their framework. But that's very different from kind of like, you just come up with something totally new. And that has got to be really a little demoralizing. It's demoralizing for me. I'm not even a lawyer. But especially demoralizing if you are a lawyer, because again, maybe you think, maybe it's not anything. It's just what these judges come up with depending on what they want to do at any given moment.
Right, which is like kind of related to the big question that's emerged now, which is, how much of it is Garland's fault, right? And how much were those litigation decisions kind of led to it fizzling out with a whimper like this? And I think in some places you can point to Missteps, right? I mean, Smith wasn't appointed until November 2022 for the January 6th. I mean, that's a long time. And, you know, we know that they started with kind of the foot soldiers. And, and the traditional way you would kind of prosecute a big thing here, you kind of start with the little guys and work your way up. And they spent a lot of time looking at the financial connections between, like, you know, your Proud Boys and then the top of Trump's inner circle. Weren't a lot of links there, right? This wasn't really a money thing.
Right.
And in some ways, we know they were kind of prodded along by the January 6th committee, which didn't bother with those lower linkages. And kind of one of the first subpoenas was for Mark Meadows, right? They went right for Trump and kind of right at his cohort. But you know, it does connect with what you're saying, that I think having beef with Garland is fine and critiquing him is fine. And I think there's a lot to be said that he was like too cautious for this moment. But is there any kind of a world where even under a different litigation strategy, this case would have wrapped up? Trump would have seen some real punishment kind of before the election. I mean, part of it was Smith was appointed, I only realized this when I was looking back, 3 days after Trump announced his reelection, right? So I do think there was, we've forgotten, but there was a sense at the beginning that like Trump was toast, right? He was done. That after January 6th, like that was so bad that you even had the Charlie Kirks of the world saying like this is one of the darkest days of our democracy kind of thing. So, you know, I do think that a little bit counts for the delay as well, that they didn't quite realize what like a stopwatch they were on.
I think that is really critical, that at a very basic level, and I think this informs a lot of what, in my mind, in retrospect, were important mistakes that Joe Biden made. But the kind of mistakes, you know, in appointing Merrick Garland, but other things that they really thought, they convinced themselves, and they weren't the only people who thought this, that if the election didn't end him, that this January 6th thing, as bad as it was, that he scorched himself and he's done. And we are turning the page. We are either, you know, going back to the good old times or launching a wonderful new era and all that kind of stuff. And we don't want to sully it up with dealing with this guy. And I really think a lot of the decisions they made were just based on that. They thought he was done, and there was not a lot of urgency. And that clearly was a pretty big miscalculation. And there were a lot of reasons that it was pretty clearly a miscalculation, I think, at the time. But you know, I've become more critical over time with, I mean, there are people out there who say, well, you waited 2 years to do anything on this, and that was a total fuck up. And that's clearly not true. They were doing stuff from almost the first moment. But I think some of these things, and this goes back to Democrats' weddedness to proceduralism more generally, that there are a lot of the people who defend Garland and the DOJ's approach to this will point out, yeah, it's too bad, but in fact, they spent 3 months in the middle of 2021 litigating this one thing with Rudy Giuliani or all this kind of stuff, and those things are true. They really were, and a lot of those things took time, not because Sam Alito was playing games. Those things take time, but I think you have to step back and say, if it took you 4 years and you could not get to trial, you did something wrong. And the reality is that the immunity thing came pretty late in the game. So I think there's one of the things is a kind of foundational miscalculation. They thought he was done, and he wasn't done. The idea that you are going to start with the foot soldiers and kind of not go in with any preconceptions, see where it goes. Some of that was that's how you do it, but some of that's that we don't want to look political. Another, I think, foundational mistake, obviously, which is based on the first one. You don't want to look political if you feel like you're kind of past it anyway. You want to stay above reproach. But there's one thing, I just want to kind of make this one point because I think it's really important. Again, proceduralism. You've got to be able to operate outside of the way things normally work, the way things are done. You know, there was back in the Bush administration, there was this one, I think it was first in an article, and Democrats for years have kind of glommed onto it, this thing about, you know, the Republicans, they're not part of the reality-based community, right? And I mean, God, that's like the tagline that launched 1,000 Twitter bios. You know, I'm part of the reality-based community, because why wouldn't you be part of it? Because reality is reality. But there's I always thought people kind of misunderstood that sometimes you have to say, I'm not going to accept how things work. I'm going to change how things work. I'm going to take the board and I'm going to throw it up in the air. And I think for looking into the future, Democrats need to be ready to do more about that stuff. So anyway.
No, totally. But then you also do like run into the structural problem of Trump stacked the judiciary in a way that redounded hugely to his benefit, right? I mean, and that stretches from Eileen Cannon and then the classified docs thing. That's Supreme Court with immunity. That's the Supreme Court immunity decision pushing off the hush money sentencing until after the election. Not that I necessarily think it would have mattered. I mean, that is something you're left with now when you're looking at the sentencing, right? And how he's walking away essentially scot-free. Like, I know he's pissy that he has to be a felon on inauguration, but like, that's kind of the extent of it.
It's pretty thin.
And I was like really thinking about this, like, why did the conviction matter so little? And I think part of it is that people thought the hush money case was the least of them, right? I mean, it's kind of old by this point. It kind of is tawdry in a way that just feels like it pales in comparison to the January 6th stuff. But also, the conviction happened 6 months before the election, before the disastrous Biden debate, before Kamala was swapped in, before the assassination attempt, you know? I mean, it's so cliche, but that was like 100 years in that campaign. And I think people like totally forgot about it, you know? And that also, you know, ties into this overarching issue, which is like, why wasn't all of his entangling legal woes more of a potent weapon? And is that because Democrats failed to use it as such? I mean, it definitely took a little bit for the convicted ad to go on TV and for that to kind of become part of the bloodstream. But I think there's also a piece where people were like, these are political, right? Like, I do think his incessant thing of this is a witch hunt permeated the atmosphere. And it took forever, right? All these cases took so long and there were so many stops and starts that I think it just kind of, you didn't have object permanence. Like it disappeared from in people's eyes and it's gone.
Right. It's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of this comes back to, I mean, sociologists have good phrases for this, but the basic way that most people have not thought through or spend a lot of time thinking through how does this fit into the functioning of the state and how significant is this thing that is happening. What you do is you look to political leaders and political proxies and you see what they say. And if they say, I mean, January 6th is a good example. As you said, with even someone as feral as Charlie Kirk, there was that period of like I mean, it's shocking how short it was. It really was like 3 or 4 days, basically. But there was a period where you had even hardcore Trump people saying, it's fucking unacceptable. That can never happen again. I mean,
Kevin McCarthy, right?
Yeah,
and then he took the pilgrimage.
Exactly, up there saying, like, he did it. He's responsible. And so many of the things that have happened over the last decade is that if you can partisanize and make a pitched battle out of every engagement, and you have the people who, again, those proxies who you are looking to say, it's okay, it's fine, that actually, you know, it sounds like a very reductive and, I don't know, a very reductive and kind of condescending way to describe people, and maybe it is, maybe it is that. But even everybody's kind of like that at a certain level. If you hear about something, you don't know a lot about it, and for Democrats, and a Nancy Pelosi or a Hakeem Jeffries says that actually that's normal, that's how it works. You say, okay.
Which was a huge problem here too, because there was some legitimate reason for Biden and the people in his administration to not go all out on this, because it's his DOJ prosecuting it, right? There was a sense of not weaponizing the Justice Department and everything, which again, a little quaint in retrospect, but that's when it falls to the Democratic, the other spokespeople or the, members of Congress or people who don't have that entanglement to be pounding it over and over and over again, because Republicans have perfected this art, right? How many Benghazi hearings-esques have they had where dominated the news, and not just on the right, where it was the marching orders for all the press, and that bled into the environment, even for people who aren't real news consumers, and over time calcified into the sense that Hillary Clinton is devious and not to be trusted and bad. And obviously we saw how that worked out in 2016. But they've perfected the art of kind of constant warfare with or without substance. And here you had it was very substantive, and Democrats kept adopting this position of we want to be above the fray, right? This is too serious to politicize. We're going to turn the page. And then you're kind of left with the realization now in this bleak time that January 6th happened, and that's it, right? He's going to pay not at all. He was elected again, right? And it's the kind of thing that as we're trying to wrap our minds around, you have to go back to that, the messaging and kind of marketing component of it, that if you might have thought that just seeing the event itself is enough to form people's convictions about it, and that's not the case, right? People forgot about it. It was a long time ago. It faded. It got blurry. Other things happened. So, we've been talking ad nauseum since the election about the information environment and the messaging weaknesses of the Democratic Party, but that's got to rank above, the top. And I don't want to absolve Republicans, obviously. Republicans should have, if Mitch McConnell had turned the page on Trump in terms of said you're done, we're done with you, we'd be in a completely different moment, right? But they decided to get on board with him, and Democrats just kind of were not able to make it a constant thudding refrain about Trump's basic just inability to be trusted with the White House again.
Yeah, no, the one thing I keep, as I've watched the hearings, I think there's one potential overinterpretation of the election outcome that you have, what was it? You had the what's the guy, Trump's doctor, right? The guy who...
Oh, the crazy looking one?
No.
Ronnie Jackson?
Yeah, Ronnie Jackson. Yeah,
Do you remember the one I'm talking about, though? Who looked like
totally.
He stuck his finger in an electrical socket?
Yeah.
He was Mr. Trump is the healthiest president we've ever had.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. They had Ronnie Jackson on some, is another Snapstream shout out. Mm-hmm. It was Aaron Rupar who put this up, and it was I don't know, it was on Fox or OANN, one of these stations, and they had Ronnie Jackson as kind of providing color commentary on the Hegseth stuff, and the interviewer said something like, did Democrats, did they make their case or something like that, and Jackson, kind of, I don't know, just coming right from the crack den, right? I don't know what but he looked pretty far gone, and he said, well, because you know what, people just want to burn that place down, and that's a strange job description for the Secretary of Defense, but when I saw some Democrats responding to them, you see the election, maybe we do need to burn it down. I don't know. We have to remember, fairly close election, and at a basic level, January 6th was not the only thing that happened in 2020. I still think, as much as like when we talk about the COVID pandemic now, it's still like there's whoever's talking about President Xi making COVID himself at home, or whatever it is, whatever or masks or vaccines. But the reality is that was such a massive and traumatic global experience. Just today, I did this post about like the gig economy and all this kind of stuff. The gig economy expanded tremendously after COVID because people were out of work and they picked up gig jobs. So I mean, it's so transformative. I think we have to keep in mind this other massive thing happened. As much as it's not Joe Biden's fault, it didn't start on his watch, but it was 5 years ago now, and Joe Biden's been president for 4 years. It's basically an experience under Joe Biden. And we just have to remember that. That is, I think that's why he lost at the end of the day. I think that's why Trump won again. And so we just can't, it's easy, I think, for Democrats to get into this mode of over-interpretation where it's maybe we need to do our own January 6th or blow something up just to get back into the conversation, I want people to refrain from that at some level. You can make a Marvel comic movie, blow stuff up that way. You can deal with it like that.
So the last thing we want to talk about, and I have this marked as my optimism section. So we want to talk about kind of schisms in the Republican Party under Trump and how that could be exploited by Democrats if they ever kind of want to crawl back from the wilderness. So on the one hand, there you have the very real environment we're going into, right? It's a Republican trifecta. Right now, they're kind of in the early stages of planning how they're going to use these reconciliation vehicles, which everyone will remember from Biden. You don't have to overcome the filibuster, only 51 votes. So basically, it's how all the legislating happens now. And they want to do immigration stuff, and they want to do tax cuts. And they're trying to figure out one bill or two. We talked about this on the last pod a little bit, that the Senate wants to do two, take the win on immigration and haggle over taxes later. The House is like one heartbeat away from a Democratic majority. So I think Mike Johnson's like, let's do it all in one.
Well, and also they remember what happened to the Democrats with Build Back Better.
Right.
Right? There's like, we saw what happened to those guys. We don't want that to happen again, right? That basic thing, you're gonna do immigration, and then that next thing's never gonna happen. So like they have a reason. They remember what 2021 was like.
Totally, and I mean, speed kind of is of the essence here, because if you think back to 2017, the big thing they did was the tax cuts, and they did those right away. And that's because the honeymoon period doesn't really exist anymore, but you have this sense of, he just won, right? Momentum's on his side. On immigration in particular, my God, are Democrats cowed, right? Like, they're kind of barreling ahead to pass this Lake and Riley Act, which is just gruesome, right? Which includes like detention for people just accused of doing kind of low-level crimes, of giving Republican attorneys general a cause of action to sue the federal government over immigration enforcement. I mean, it's like truly a Republican wet dream that Democrats are like, yeah, sure, we'll help, So
well, it started as a messaging bill, not even
right.
a bill that they really thought of as something that they were going to try to pass.
So now Republicans are going to have to get into the nitty-gritty of governing, right? Which is like something they're not that well versed in of late. And the same schisms there exist under Trump, if in a bit of a smoothed over version. But you still have the kind of like the Tea Party right? The Chip Roys and everything, who don't want to do government spending and are just, their role since they've been elected has been primarily to be obstructionist, right? That's kind of the tradition they came up in. And the big question has been, to what degree will they like put aside those dogmas now that it's in service of Trump, right? The great unifying glue of the Republican Party right now. And we got a little bit of a taster of that with the Mike Johnson speakership elections, right? That there was some drama, there was some a slight rebellion from the right, but they let him do it in one vote, right? I mean, they didn't force him to run the McCarthy gauntlet of 15 rounds. So, congressionally, I think, and I know you have thoughts on this, the kind of the ideological schisms are going to be apparent sooner rather than later, because you've got reconciliation, you've got to do spending, you've got to deal with the debt ceiling at some point. Like, there is some must pass legislation in the mix.
Yeah, and that to me is the big thing that is being, maybe not within D.C. because that's a different media environment. The roll calls and the punch bowls and stuff, and talking about all these small moving parts, but nationally. People are thinking all right, is he going to execute Pelosi first or Biden first, and all these kind of things, where in fact they want to do their tax cut. They will do their tax cut. They want to do the immigration stuff. They have a bunch of things they want to do. Technically, with reconciliation, it's supposed to be that it cuts the deficit, but it's the 10-year time horizon. That's why you keep having these tax cuts that expire after a decade and all that stuff. But they also have the debt ceiling in there. And the only way you're going to get Republicans to vote for the debt ceiling thing is to package it together with executing Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi or some fun stuff, right? And so what that does is that actually creates. Everybody's thinking they're going to do the fun stuff. They're going to, start rounding people up. But actually, in the spring, they've got to pass this massive bill that does the immigration stuff, does the tax cut stuff. They've got, from the House, people who want pay-fors, which means you've got to, if not abolish Obamacare, defund it, cut a bunch of Medicaid. That's going to be really hard. And I'm not sure they're actually going to be able to do it, or if it's not going to kind of, break apart in weird ways. So there are definitely ways that Democrats can get into the mix there, right? On these, they're talking about cutting a lot of really popular programs and ones that their own supporters are for, and again, it's one of these things where, kind of in the same way with nominations, you can never create a situation for yourself where you think by your opposition you're going to kind of voodoo people and Republicans are gonna change their mind, but you can lay the groundwork for the next election. So that's a lot of opportunities, and I just think it's a much bigger, a much more complicated challenge than a lot of people think.
And we're already seeing cracks, right? At first, Mike Johnson was we're going to deal with the debt ceiling by ourselves, which was always so silly because it's been used singularly as a weapon against Democrats in recent history. And, I did reporting on this one of the times it came up, and I was going around asking them, why don't you just get rid of it, right? If not by repeal, you can hike it up to $1 gajillion and never hit it, never worry about it again. And it's because people don't like the optics of, Senator Josh voted to raise the debt ceiling to $1 gajillion, and having people, kind of misinterpret what that means and think that you're a profligate spender. So how is that going to fly with the Chip Roys, right? You're never going to get them to agree to do that. So he's already saying, well, okay, we're probably going to need to do that with Democratic help, because of course, right? That's how this always works. When you've got this obstinate right flank that won't vote for anything but the dream bill, it yanks everything to the left because you need Democratic participation. We've seen that over and over again. And the only difference here is you've got Trump, right? And it's can Trump kind of whip people into line? But he doesn't have the focus or the discipline or the knowledge to guide them through this. We already see it with the reconciliation bills, right? It's do you want one bill or two? And one day he's I want one big, beautiful bill. And then the next he's two is fine. He doesn't care. That's not what he's in this for, Yeah,
that's way beneath his pay grade.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think this, what we're going to kind of end on is, speaking of schisms in the Republican Party, that it is right now ideologically just completely incoherent. And you have a lot of these countervailing factors that are brought together under the auspices of electing Trump, right? You think of, you've got kind of the religious right, the anti-abortion zealots, versus the manosphere kind of, here's how to be a pickup artist, here's how to get babes and do drugs kind of thing. Like, those things are totally at odds. You have the isolationists, the America First versus the let's manifest destiny Greenland, right? Like, it's just all these people who are in it for totally different reasons, and we're already starting to see some of those like cracks emerge, right? You have Bannon and Loomer fighting with Elon Musk, and he's taking away people's check marks, you know? I mean, it's because you have a motley crew that is just unified because they love Trump, right? And because they want him to be king, and they'll kind of do whatever it takes to get there. And the more optimistic part of that is, what do you do without Trump? Like, do you have the parts of this group that are not traditionally like big constituencies in politics fall out again? Or the worrying way to look at it is, are we going to start hearing kind of Trump 2028 stuff sooner rather than later? Because what's going to be the carrot, you know? How do you keep such, you know, diametrically opposed factions together under the same roof? We always call Democrats the big tent party,
right,
but it really is Republicans who have no kind of like ideological coherence at this point.
And I think, you know, one especially big part of that is Elon Musk, and not just the ideological part. He is someone that Trump, a kind of person that Trump has never had to deal with before in his political career, in the sense that, you know, everybody else, he can just, you know, say that this person is dead to us, and they're dead, and he fires them, or like the Scaramucci guy, or all that kind of stuff. I don't think he can do that with that anybody else becomes, you know, dead in the sort of conservative media sphere. That's not the case with Musk. He has Twitter. He can. I don't think he can rid himself of Musk, and Musk is going to continue to, you know, very big on this Doge ridiculousness, and, you know, cutting all these programs and everything. So that is, again, I think that is going to continue to be a great difficulty for them, because again, he is more powerful, I think, in many ways than Donald Trump is. And Donald Trump is tired. You see it in him. He does not have, he simply doesn't have the energy or the focus that he had. I mean, standards change, but that he had in 2016. He doesn't have to go to jail now. That's a job well done, right? That's, you know, I'm not sure you need more than that.
What a treat, though, right? To like watch this play out, for
Yes.
Trump to know he needs Elon, even as he's getting annoyed by him. You know,
Yeah.
you can see it kind of peeking through, but now Elon's got his office space marked out in the EEOB. You know, it's like when Trump gave that one little aside where he's like, yeah, he's been around a lot, you know, he keeps being around. So I don't know. That's a little treat for all of us to watch.
I mean, it's, there are treats and there are treats, but I think that's right. And you can kind of use, he has said a few things like that. And what is very entertaining about that is that, you know, Trump makes a lot of those barbed remarks before things escalate for him. But he's now saying those things with Elon Musk, those, again, barbed remarks that come maybe a month before he turns on someone. But there's something extra in the barbed remark, because you can, you know, maybe there's a very small possibility, this is me imagining it, but I don't think so. I think there is a recognition on his part, he can't turn on him because he's too powerful. He has too much money. He has the whole tech world, those guys. And that's a position that I know he's not used to, and that will make him even weirder, because he knows that there's really, he's stuck with him. He's stuck with them.
Totally.
So,
all right.
anyway,
I guess we'll leave it at that.
I think that's all we have for this episode.
See you next week.
See you next week, people.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.